we got two things to talk about with Mike Pompeo. One is you've heard a lot of decrying the idea of how Parler lost its service with Amazon servers, and they'll be back up in about 5 or 6 days when they work out their coding, and so they can be on the servers of some other outfit. And you've heard a lot about the First Amendment issues and the fact that Donald Trump can't be on Twitter and whatnot. What you haven't heard is that a Republican appointee, Trump appointee at the Voice of America, punished a reporter for asking questions of Mike Pompeo about Pompeo's role in basically delegitimizing the election and promoting an grievance that ultimately led to the death of 5 people in a Capitol insurrection. Here is Mike Pompeo ignoring this Voice of America reporter's question.
What are you doing to repair U.S. reputation around the world? Mr. Secretary, do you regret? Mr. Secretary, do you regret there will be a? Mr. Secretary, do you regret saying there will be a second Trump administration?
Those questions that Patsy Widakusura, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, asked, ended up getting her reassigned and punished for questioning Mike Pompeo. Now, I'm sure if you go on to the Twitter accounts, you hear the commentary from those people who are decrying the assault on the First Amendment that Donald Trump's banning from Twitter got him. Remember, the U.S. government's not doing it. Voice of America is the U.S. government. They are funded by the U.S. government. This is literally an extreme case of a violation of like freedom of the press by the U.S. government.
Is that in the Constitution?
It is. My understanding is it's not. You're allowed to ask Mike Pompeo questions. Here, though, when we're talking about Mike Pompeo, here is something that may be even more relevant, or at least hopefully not. The new head of the CIA, Bill Burns, actually operated the backdoor channel to that basically led to the Iran nuclear deal. There was a backdoor channel out of the limelight so that the Obama administration could do this without...
well, he's a career diplomat, which was a shockingly decent pick by Biden for the head of the CIA, although I'm sure he'll be engulfed in their horrific bureaucracy at some point.
But the idea is, I think it's at least a signal that Biden is trying to, or at least contemplating, rapprochement with the Iranians. And Mike Pompeo wants to do everything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen. And I would imagine also shoring up his bona fides for a 2024 election because he thinks he's going to run for president.
Yeah, crushing, starving, denying the Iranians medicine and food. Good for his chances in 2024 for sure.
Here is a Mike Pompeo saying that Iran, you'll recall, Shiite Muslims, has been harboring Al-Qaeda members, Sunni Muslims.
This sounds very familiar to me, Sam.
Well, if it worked once, why not try it again? Here's Mike Pompeo.
I want to start with a quick story in these remarks today. Many of you here may recognize the name Abu Muhammad al-Masri, also known as Abdullah Ahmed Abdullah. He was Al-Qaeda's worldwide number 2 and on the FBI's most wanted list for slaughtering members of our State Department family in the Kenya and Tanzania bombings of 1998. More than 200 people, including 12 Americans, lost their lives in those attacks. The New York Times reported in November that al-Masri was shot to death on the streets of Tehran. Today, I can confirm for the first time his death on August 7th of last year. The Times wrote, quote, that he had been living in Iran was surprising, given that Iran and al-Qaeda are bitter enemies, end of quote. It could not be more wrong. It wasn't surprising at all. And more importantly, they're not enemies. Al-Masri's presence inside Iran points to the reason that we're here today. It's what I want to talk about in these remarks. Al-Qaeda has a new home base. It is the Islamic Republic of Iran. As a result, bin Laden's wicked creation is poised to gain strength and capabilities. We ignore this Iran-Al-Qaeda nexus at our own peril. We need to acknowledge it. We must confront it. Indeed, we must defeat it. Now, I know this news will come as a surprise to many Americans. We had al-Qaeda on the ropes after 9/11, thanks to sustained efforts of our brave soldiers, intelligence officers, diplomats, NATO allies, many others who worked tirelessly to defend freedom. There are far fewer al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan today than there have been in decades. That remains true. This is an enormous tribute to American resolve, American ingenuity, American leadership, and frankly, raw American military strength. That effort drove al-Qaeda to search for a safer haven, and they found one. The Islamic Republic of Iran was the perfect choice. Al-Qaeda has in fact carried on a relationship to Iran for nearly 3 decades, as the 9/11 Commission clearly established. In the early 90s, al-Qaeda operatives traveled to Iran in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, the heartland of Hezbollah, for explosives training. In the period before 9/11, the Iranian regime told border inspectors not to stamp al-Qaeda members' passports when they entered or left Iran on their way to or from Afghanistan. This was to help them avoid suspicion when they returned to their home countries.
Okay.
Well, let's just start with this. You'll notice that the only evidence of this nexus that he asserts is that one al-Qaeda member was killed in that country. Sounds like he was assassinated by, who knows. What's fascinating about this is that it's unclear like when they got this information about these assertions, because you would think that if they had gotten these, they had this intelligence, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, 18 months ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago, that they would have given this speech then, not 4 days before he's leaving office and can't do anything about it. I mean, this is so flimsy, and such garbage. It's fascinating. It's fascinating that, he should be happy about the insurrection only so that people can't scrutinize the absolute BS he's shoveling.
And thankfully, because this comes from the Trump orbit, the media has chosen now to be skeptical about these claims. But imagine the arrogance of somebody who's going to really just recycle the same bullshit that we heard that justified us to get into the Iraq war and just copy paste and apply it to Iran, which we get it. Bolton, Pompeo, and the like have been trying to get into a bloody conflict with for decades and decades at this point. It seems like it's their life's work. Like, that is somebody who believes they're above consequences and above everything here. And this is the second time in the past few months that they've tried to drum up conflict with Iran. Do you remember when the director of national intelligence came out? People forget about this. Said that Iran was trying to influence our elections, provided no evidence about it whatsoever. That just happened. People forget about it because there's never a requirement by the media, not never, but oftentimes they'll just reprint with what our intelligence agencies say and take it at face value. But there's been a million other instances about trying to drum up conflict with Iran. Like, I have no faith in the claim that Iran tried to influence our elections. Zero
I, on the other hand, have no doubt that Iran and probably a dozen other countries, some fashion or another, are, and I guess how broadly you talk about influence, are trying to constantly get information and steer things towards a way that may be more sympathetic to them. I mean, we do this.
We do it to way greater effect.
And we do it significantly more because we have more resources in that regard. But this is what countries do. But that is fundamentally different, in my estimation, from the idea that you're going to gin up this Al-Qaeda stuff. I mean, and I don't think it's going to work. I mean, I just it's just, he's just up there making a bunch of assertions. What they did do was they did put Cuba on the state-sponsored terrorism list, which, again, is just going to involve having to unwind that stuff with the Biden administration. I think what Pompeo is trying to do is just light a bunch of different diplomatic fires around the world, so that Biden to just really basically obstruct the Biden administration at the beginning from carrying out, any type of decent agenda. Fortunately, this is the value of the 50-50 Senate, is that like on day one, and we should also say that traditionally, you would have confirmation hearings already beginning right now in most administrations. Obviously, we're not getting that in this instance, but that's going to be the advantage of the 50-50 Senate.
And I think it's also just quickly even more ideological than just trying to screw with Biden and make him have to put out a bunch of fires. You get these neocons, they start to believe in the idea of American exceptionalism. I mean, they already, of course, do, but he sees this as his legacy, as flexing American muscle against his enemies around the world. And that's how you get to a much deeper, more insidious obsession, because it's a religious obsession, and it allows them to justify atrocities like this and pretend it's in American interest.
Yeah, I just saw a James in Jersey. Hard to get excited about Al-Qaeda when we lose more Americans to COVID than 9/11 daily for weeks.
Yep.
Indeed. Good point.